four artists who are activists, and I'm going to just say incredible painters, sculptors, drawers, that we are so excited to have at the gallery. We have Naomi Tepic. Do you say Tepich?
Tepich, but
Tepich,
it's
sorry.
probably Tepin.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Well, that
If I
doesn't
say
sound
your
too
name
good.
wrong, Alice Innes, is that right?
You got it.
Okay. Pamela Casper and Robin Almquist, who are mostly New York side artists.
PA, and well, I live in two places, so both sides of the river.
Okay, both sides. Well, we welcome you to this side of the river, all of you, and welcome to all the people who came out today to hear the talk and see this amazing work. I will say that I've gotten, since Naomi's been working on this show for a long time, so it's an incredible amount of
Energy.
love and energy that you put into it. But it's beautiful. And since we hung at Jay, wherever you are, Jay, and Naomi, and we had a couple of volunteers who I don't see here, but thanks to them, I've had people calling me say they just think it's an incredible show. So thank you, women, to you for your art. I'm gonna, and you guys all are gonna participate, obviously, and ask whatever questions you want, but we're gonna hear from the artists themselves about varying pieces of what they do. And the pieces have everything to do with making art, the process of it, why they do it, and maybe it's just because they have to, and that's, I think, a real reason why artists make art, but also them as women activists who are interested in sort of the continuing planet. And that's obvious in the work that we see here. I'm gonna just say a couple of words about today, what we're all experiencing, and then they're gonna touch on that with questions from me and Jay, and then Naomi's gonna start really by telling about the curation. What I've been thinking about since we hung the show is, I've really been thinking a lot about it, and that's what, when art is, to me, it's best. Even when you're away from it, it keeps in your mind. And there's all these questions I have about it, and sadness, I think, which is really weird, because I usually get mostly just happy. Oh, hi. Happy with the beauty of it, but it's such an incredible emotional experience that I know we're all having these days about the environment, about other things that are happening in the world. So it's that feeling too. I guess I wanted to say that two things. I'll be as quick as I can be. A lot of people came from Scranton, other places where they were outside in the rain, trying to make their voices heard in a time when it's hard to do that, so thank you for doing that. I also heard some news that Donald Trump apparently is planning to cut down a magnolia tree that's been outside the White House now since Andrew Jackson was president.
Oh my God.
He had brought 2 seeds, or a few seeds, handful of seeds from Tennessee, planted them for his wife Rachel, and people, not just Trump, think this tree needs to come down. And it just, to me, is they say it's a danger, it's a danger, I think was the word. And that word coming from this administration is such an interesting thing about a tree. But he promises to plant a better tree. And he promises that, I think they're gonna make a dance floor somewhere near the tree. So that's good.
That and the Kennedy Center.
Yeah, and that, not to rail about it, but it's just this offering you guys have given makes that kind of thing even more kind of weird. I wanted to just also say that I've been thinking a lot about 2 people. Ai Weiwei, who's a Chinese painter, artist who was imprisoned in China, who's very well-known contemporary artist who makes art about struggle and varying topics, conceptual kind of art. But one of the things that the first thing that I ever knew that he made was, it's at the Tate Gallery, and it's 100 million porcelain sunflower seeds that I've never seen. I've only seen pictures of, but people are asked to experience that by stepping on it, holding it, touching it, and it's a symbol of so many things, mostly sunflowers, I think, but it's a real vision, and if you haven't seen it, you should just look online. If you can possibly get to London, you can see it in person. His quote gets me, and I think of you guys when I think of him and you and this show. He says, everything is art and everything is politics. And that's a pretty succinct way of talking about what you do, what you guys do. The other person that comes to mind, and I've been thinking a lot about her, is Rachel Carson, and maybe you guys know, she wrote a book called The Silent Spring in 1962, I realized. I was 2 years old when that book was first published, and what she warned of and what we have turned a blind eye to is startling, and this show also made me think of her. So thank you, artists. Her quote here, there's a million of them, but I could just say, the more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and realities of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for destruction. Meaning about us, meaning around us. So I could say it again better, because I didn't read that very well. The more clearly we can focus our attention on the wonders and reality of the universe about us, the less taste we shall have for destruction. So I guess the question I have is, and Naomi, you must have had a lot of these thoughts when you put the show together. You want to talk about it?
Yes. I've done other curation before. I think altogether I've curated close to either 9 or 10 shows. And half of them have been about the environment. One of them was called River and Biota. And that was 2013, I think, at Catskill Art Society in Livingston Manor. And that show was sort of a little problematic for me, although it was wonderful. But I mean, I didn't have that much experience with curation, and I wanted this show to be perfect. So I, first of all, I think I chose the artists well. They all connect in different ways. They all are organic. They're all about nature, including myself. And I just wanted to show another side of artists who are influenced by nature, but also feel almost spiritual about it, and have looked into it deeply so they understand it. And now with, my husband also is very environmental, and I have to say that was a big influence on doing this kind of show for years already. And I just felt, very like I was doing something. I was doing something for the environment. And so, without further ado, that was the main reason. And I think each artist is very special. They're totally professional and totally dedicated to their art form. So it was a pleasure to work with them, and I learned how to, do more. I mean, I took more of an active part. I didn't just say, well, you do this and you do that and I'll do this. I took a lot of the responsibility. So for me, it was a learning curve also. And I don't know that I'm going to do another one.
We hope so.
I bet you do.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, we're all happy you did this one, and it's just starting, which is the really nice thing. I love about this gallery is just coming back to it and seeing it again and again and again. All the shows, but this has been really special. I guess the way we're gonna do this talk, we're gonna kind of have it more of a conversation than a you know, one person, the next person, the next person. And I guess the first question I have is, when did you know, and jump in, any of you artists, when did this idea of the environment and what's happening in the world, when did you realize that's what you were making art about? Or did you decide to make art about it? And I think there's two different parts to that. Like, you can be an artist who you're making something and you're like, oh, this is what this is about. Or did you say, I need to make art about the environment? That's my question.
I can answer first.
Okay.
I'm Pamela Casper, and I think the decisive moment for me was having bought some old farmland with my husband back in 2007, walking around on it and having twin, at that time, 5-year-olds, and reading and hearing about impending fracking and disappearance of the bees and all of the threats to the environment. I began to realize that the world, the natural world that I wanted to exist for my kids might be at risk. So I began to make work about nature and nurture. So the work that you see in the back there, the nests, the drawings, were specifically done at that time. And I'll just say that that work represents about 15 years ago, work that I did and concerns I had. Then I walked the land that I was on and gathered old barbed wire and wood and began to think about what would happen where there was a world where they didn't have wood, where the animals couldn't create the nests, and so the sculptures represent, are a metaphor for extinction, because they are made of materials that can't really nurture, yet the animal has the instinct to create the nest, but it's not going to survive. So that period of work began then, and that's when it began for me.
Me? Okay. Well, I first became interested in climate change, I think I was in the 8th grade. So what is that, like 13 or 14 years old? I did a science project with a friend, and have sort of since then always had it in my mind, you know, it's so frustrating to see so much time go by and so little being done. Obviously there's been some progress in legislation, but you know, with the current occupant in the White House, when he was first elected the first time, I just decided as a visual artist that my art had to be political. It had to be about things that were important to me. It couldn't just be, you know, beautiful landscapes or objects or innocuous things. So now whenever I create anything, and even, you know, I did these little landscapes here, which look innocuous, but to me, it's, you know, the natural world is disappearing, species are disappearing, insects are disappearing, things that we all rely on and our whole ecosystem relies on are in danger, and now they're more in danger than ever. And it still feels like very little is happening politically, in our legislature, globally, you know, and it's frustrating. And so, you know, as someone who, I'm not in politics, you know, I don't have lots of money to donate to campaigns. This is my way of trying to educate people. I know people still doubt whether humans are causing this, which to me is insane, but you know, I hope that when people look at my work, they not only like the work, but that maybe they learn something, or they change their mind about something, or or at least just think about it, you know.
So, I guess I've always been an environmental activist. I remember in second grade living in Queens, New York, and there was big drought. I remember sitting on the counter as my mother was washing dishes, and she would let the water run, and I would turn it off, and every time she turned around to get another dish, and she was furious at me. But that was second grade, and then fast forward to high school. I was president of my high school ecology club. We initiated we initiated a recycling program first for the town on Long Island, and then really became instrumental in getting curbside recycling in that town. It was very early, before it was almost anywhere. We might have been the first town in Long Island that did that. So it's very old for me. But then I went to college thinking I would be an environmentalist, but I switched in college to art, which is another strong story. But then when fracking kind of threatened our area, that reignited this really old flame in me. I got very involved. I was very much in the center of that anti-fracking movement. One of the proudest things I've done in my life is what I've done to try to keep fracking out of our area and out of New York and actually the whole world, really. And I remember someone saying, I want to put you in an environmentalist show, and I was like, this is my art, it doesn't look environmental. And it made me realize, I'm one person, how can I have these two really very different, sensibly different passions of this very outward environmental activist and then this very inward painter. And then I kind of remember that I used to paint landscapes up here, like real landscapes, and I loved that. I always thought they were political, but they were just landscapes, like how could they be political? So I kind of put this all together, and I realized that really what I'm saying, and what I really believe deeply, is that we, as human beings, we need to connect with each other, we need to connect with the land that we're, the earth, we need to understand how we're all related and how we want to protect everything, and really the only way we're going to get to those deep connections is to let ourselves be vulnerable to our own inner worlds, and I'd like my paintings to be a place where people can reach that vulnerable spot, and I think that in our world, which is so commercial and is just people, I think, buy because they're unhappy. And so they buy more and they buy more, and I think they would be less unhappy if they spent time with their best friends and family. And so I'm hoping, I think my paintings help bring people to that space where they can recognize within themselves what is really important about being human, and then have that extend beyond and recognize how important our land is and everything else that we love on this planet. And that, I think they're really very much political statements.
Mm-hmm. So I came to the environment in a kind of an indirect way. I would say feminism was my big influence in college, and I joined even after I graduated, I joined a women's group, women art group, and then but I was always connected to nature. Even when I lived in the city, somehow nature would always pop up. Even I lived among bridges, but so soon after I moved to the country here, I became especially interested in all kinds of plants and the environment and political aspects, and the fracking didn't happen right away, but it was after my studio was built that it suddenly had to deal with it, and so I became quite active with, I did 2 Art Fest shows for Damascus Citizen for Sustainability, and we raised about $10,000 during both shows, and then at the same time, my work I did a lot of hiking. Martin, my husband, got me into hiking out in South Dakota, out in the Black Hills, and then I also hiked in the Catskills. When I first came here, I joined a hiking group, and that was a turning point for me, because I would just notice mushrooms. I'd notice, I had visited a lot of visitor centers and out west, and I noticed fossils and all kinds of plants, and the activism sort of went hand in hand with learning about new organic forms, and then I participated in Earth Reflections, Earth Speaks, Address the Earth Art Expo, Art Deco, Art and Activism versus the Drill. So that was in New York at Exit Art. So I was.
I organized.
And I was in.
You were in too, okay. There were a lot of people in that show. But anyhow, it went hand in hand with the art. And at the same time, the art was developing. I'm a late developer. I played the piano early on, but when I did do art, I started out with, I won't talk about my art yet.
Ask another question.
Oh, okay. Talk about your art. Talk about the process you use or have in making your art, all of you. Naomi, you want to?
Okay, so as long as I'm on the topic. So I loved the hard materials initially. At Pratt Institute, I studied welding. That was my graduate school. But even in Brooklyn College, I was working with plexiglass with an artist named Sylvia Stone, who inspired me to work with that materials, but brought in stuff that had broken in her studio, and big pieces though, and anyhow, so I loved the harder materials. I wanted nothing to do with clay. I didn't like the mess of clay. I really, I steered away. I didn't even take one course in ceramics. And then I went through periods of stone carving, metal and stone combinations, drawings, and finally I just came upon clay, and it happened because my hands hurt. And so I think I had a commission to do a sculpture, and I did it intensely, and then my hands got affected. So I said, I better stop this stone carving and think of something softer. So meantime, I was a teacher also. I taught at the Board of Ed for several high schools, and I figured, clay would be great for students. And so I took, during my sabbatical year, I studied at Parsons, and it was a wonderful department, and I really got into clay. And it was a mutual, I started teaching after that year, and the students loved it, and we sort of influenced each other. They just, I didn't have to tell them to do anything, they just loved it. I of course taught them how to do things, but and then later I just wanted to express my nature feelings in clay, and I used, for those tall pieces, they're mushrooms. I used the coil method, and then after they grew enough, it was based on a photograph that a friend had sent me of trumpet mushrooms, and I carved them. So it was sort of touching base with my carving experience. And then after 5 years passed, after glazing them, I fired them in my own electric kiln, and then I glazed them in a gas kiln that was in Pine Bush at New Prospect clay, New Prospect pottery, a lady who has 5 kilns. So then I like to draw as well, and so 5 years later, I made these drawings a few months ago that all relate to the sculptures. And I like to do that sometimes. I like to have the 2-dimensional and the 3-dimensional, especially in this show, with everybody having more than one medium. I thought it was would be interesting to see all the mediums. And I'm really glad, Pamela, that you're a sculptor too, you know, so.
No limits. You can be a painter, you can be a sculptor, you can be, I want to do clay next too. Take some lessons with you.
So, I don't know, is that enough, or?
You can add more if you want to.
Later on.
And the processes you guys go through with your.
So, I guess primarily, painting has been the medium I'm most involved in. I think I've been a painter since the day I could pick up a brush. I went to the High School of Music and Art. My grandfather was a painter. My father sculpted. I couldn't escape it. I did try to escape it by going to college in Swarthmore, this one, and I just couldn't escape it. I went back to it, but I did study biology in college, and I think the work that we're seeing on the wall here, the paintings, really meshes my interest in how things work and how life functions and what causes everything to be the way it is, mixed in with my interest in painting, and color is a huge thing for me. I was a textile designer to earn a living for many years. So all of that has played into an evolution in my work, which began more straightforwardly with the drawings and probably more straightforward paintings, which aren't here, to a more invented kind of landscape. And that began when I first went on a fishing trip with my husband, and he took me to a river in Oregon called the Umpqua River, and you could see the roots of the trees exposed along the river. And I began to think, they're gorgeous, and I did drawings of them, and I thought, what's going on down below where these roots are? And at the same time, I was reading a book about by Michael Pollan called The Omnivore's Dilemma, which you may have all read. Reading has influenced my work a great deal about soil biology, and Pollan introduced the idea to me that beside eating mushrooms, which I loved, because that's my other passion, food, that mushrooms and trees have this symbiotic relationship. And out in Oregon, I was seeing these forest fires, and that's where you can find the best mushrooms in a forest fire, like morels, because what's happening is the mushroom is the flower of the organism, and the organism is the mycelium underground, which is massive. And that intrigued me no end. And so I began to make paintings about imagining what it was like underground. And I researched and read what other organisms were there with the roots and with the mushrooms. So that's what you're seeing on the wall. The paintings are almost like a slice through the soil, as though, like a map of what might be happening under the ground. And in the smaller painting closest to us, I'm actually zeroing in on the roots, and I like to put magnified organisms that you wouldn't normally see with your natural eye next to things you do see, like a cicada or an insect, because by juxtaposing these two things, I'm allowing the viewer to see that everything is happening at once, whether you see it or not. There's this simultaneous, continuous unfolding of life. And I engage in a lot of color because I want to reverse the bias we all have about soil, that it's a dead place, that it's dark, that it's dirty. that it's the most alive part of our ecosystem, actually, upon which everything depends. And that's how I'm, choosing to be an activist, by bringing attention to a part of the natural world that we mostly cannot see. And the art in itself is an activist gesture, because you don't have to read a lot of documents that are complicated and overwhelming, but you can look and say, wow, I never realized all this was happening. Where am I in all of this? It's a very internal experience. The art creates this internal experience. All of our art does. And then we can decide how we want to change our ways, so to speak.
Wow.
I can tell you a lot more about mushrooms too.
By the way,
Yeah, tell them about what you
Oh,
got.
yeah, I made a kind of a little list of ways to get involved and conserve soil, since that's a major focus for me. And there's also a couple of organizations, one in particular called SPUN, which is the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks. And their mission is basically to map the fungal networks of the planet and advocate for their protection, because apparently in the international conservation laws, fauna and flora are protected, but fungi are not. So it's, it's the it's the Fauna Flora Funga Initiative. So that's one of many. And then I have a list of books that are great to read, and a couple of other organizations that you can contribute to.
and I just want to say, I have a bunch of vocabulary, including mycelium and fungi and different types of mushrooms that do different things. If you want to read it while you're here, you can refer to that as well.
And speaking about art, a lot of artists are now using the mycelium to make art, because you can, and I think they're also being used for consumer products like boxes, because you can,
Yeah.
they get really hard, yeah.
There's
Fabric.
a sample
Fabric,
at the office at Damascus Citizens. They have a casting in mycelium,
Wow.
and it sort of looks like foam. but-
Yeah.
Huh.
It's pretty cool. Yeah. You wanna-
Oh, sure. So, like most artists, I've always painted, always been an illustrator, dabble in a little printmaking, but mostly two-dimensional art. But, when I was working on this project here, these three larger pieces, I used an acrylic gouache, which isn't really gouache, it's just a flat acrylic paint, to paint them. And here I was doing artwork on forest fires, and I was doing work on plastic waste and all kinds of things, and I started thinking about the medium I was using and how it's also plastic, and how I was cleaning my brushes and dumping it down the sink. And it got me thinking about, how do I go forward and do better? So these smaller paintings are on wood, and they're casein, which is a milk-based paint. But there's still cadmiums in it. There's still, heavy metals and things that, again, I'm dumping down the drain. And that led me back to oil painting with linseed oil, and I bought some natural pigments through the Real Milk Paint Company. So I've been experimenting with those. They're not as bright. The yellows aren't super bright, the reds aren't super bright, but actually they have I kind of like the quality of that. And it's been a fun evolution doing projects like this, where it got me thinking about, what is my impact? How can I be a better citizen and still make art and still feel good about it? It's hard to be an environmentalist in this world. It's hard not to buy plastic. It's so challenging. But for me, it's really important to me to just always try to as far as when I'm working on art, to use materials that are sustainable. You know, I'm not one of those artists that's really concerned about archivalness. I mean, I do use, you know, 100% rag paper and things like that, but you know, my work might not last 1,000 years, like yours probably will. But you know, that's okay.
You know, the fungi can actually make the stone deteriorate.
It digests the stone.
Yeah, it's really
Another
amazing.
thing about fungi as a ecological ally is that it draws down, the mycelium draws down CO2, so it helps with climate change. It can also be a way to process toxic materials. They
Yes.
found fungi that can actually eat radioactive material,
Yes.
plastic.
Yes.
And it's a different strain than the fungi that, you know, exist with trees, the fungi that live on dead material, on live material. It's very fascinating.
Right.
And they're also talking about a kind of an intelligence that's non-brain based with fungi. The mycelium can actually navigate around objects, sense electricity, sense water, sense heat, and even has a kind of memory.
And they communicate with the plants,
Yeah.
certain fungi.
Through the,
They're, in this listing there, you can read about what each type of mushroom does, and they're ones that we eat, you know, like just, they have different functions, so it's quite interesting.
So I guess I have a very different route into all of this from everyone else, which is sort of one reason I want to be the last one to speak in this round. So I guess I always did art when I was a little kid, and then I just basically stopped. I don't think it was kind of peer pressure, none of my friends did. And then when I went to college, as I mentioned before, I wanted to be an environmentalist. I was really good at math. I thought I'd be, I guess I didn't know the name, but I guess it would have been an environmental engineer. I just thought that human beings had destroyed the planet so much we should also be able to fix it, and I wanted to be part of the fix. But then freshman year, it's a long story, I got less interested in math, and I took an art history course because I thought that's what you do when you're in college, is you get cultured, and art history seemed to be very cultured. So I went to Swarthmore outside of Philadelphia, and so we had to write a paper that was an analysis of a painting in the museum, compositional analysis. And this was way before the internet, so I couldn't find any photograph of the painting that I chose to work from. And so I thought to myself, well, I guess I'd better draw it, because the teacher won't know what I'm talking about. And it's the first time I really drew anything in any way that, as a quasi-adult, and it was that kind of experience of where I totally lost myself. You know, I had no idea how many hours or minutes or whatever it was in front of this painting, and when it was done, my drawing looked like the painting, and so those two things together really astonished me, and I thought they were telling me something. So I kind of took some studio courses and kind of switched my major, and sort of didn't really have studio art major at the time, so I majored in art history, and then I went on to art school after college. And as I said before, then when I got out of art school, actually probably while I was still in graduate school, I started painting landscapes in the summer, and that's really when I fell in love with this area. I came up here, and I, for many years, painted the landscapes here. Those landscape paintings, they never really look like landscapes. I thought I would describe them as Jackson Pollock meets Cezanne. So I was very much really looking at where are things, like Cezanne, really looking at where are things located relative to each other, what's the space, what's the light, like what do I see, like really interested in the perception. And I began also, I was reading at one point a book about chaos, and I realized that I remember saying to myself, oh, the mathematicians have finally caught up to me, because I was looking for the pattern. You know, like there are all these trees in a forest, like how do I simplify this down to a pattern? Or the water in a waterfall, like what's the pattern? But but I always thought I was doing more than just looking at the landscape. And I really like rivers that would go somewhere, and I sort of thought metaphorically like the light at the end of the tunnel. I could just kind of, I always thought there was something else, that there was some metaphor that those landscape paintings had to do with. And then also there were numerous artist calls for exhibitions for political art, and I always wanted to submit my landscapes to those political art shows, but I knew they were landscapes, they were very green, like there's nothing in them that looks political, so I never did, and I was always sad because I knew they were political, kind of for the reasons I said about my current work. And then I sort of went through this big transition, and that's another story in itself how that happened, but I began really being interested in trying to capture visually the emotional, like what's the essence of being human, really, what are our dreams, our experiences, our hopes, our fears, the interrelationships with other people, and how we treat each other. I just really felt like this is critically what art can express, and how can I express that? Why is it that art has been usurped by religions always? Because they're sort of trying to do the same thing, which is express this unexpressible soul or spirit that we have in us. And I began reading mythology and realizing that that's what I wanted to work from. So instead of working from landscapes, I began working from mythology. And so I spent many years working from the Ramayana, which is an Indian kind of their sort of Bible. And also I spent a lot of time working from Ovid's Metamorphoses, and then also Apollonius's, it's not really a myth, it's a novel, The Golden Ass. And I just was trying to create a sense of it's like I come out of landscape painting. Everything I do is really in a landscape. There's always a ground plane. There's always like sky. There's always light that sort of comes through somehow in some way that is what actually does happen. And all the marks, even though I know it looks really abstract, they are all references to things, to trees, to people. Maybe sometimes they're spatial notations, but it's really always based on landscape. And I'm trying to picture in my head, if there's something that's happening in the story I'm working from, well, what does that look like? So if there's two people walking in the woods, well, I'm gonna have two people and I'm gonna have trees, and then, okay, but they're in love, or they're about to kill each other, like there's something happening. And so what's the light of that in the space? Like, what does that look like? And maybe like a cinematographer would try to figure out, like, how would I light this so it would express what's going on here.
I have a question for you.
Okay, but anyway, so that's kind of what I'm trying to do, and you know, I guess that's what I would say. I'll ask you.
How do you choose your colors?
I think like with everything else, it chooses me. So I sort of think, I don't know, I think of synesthesia, and I don't know, maybe I sort of have that a little bit, but in a way that is not what is the technical definition of synesthesia. So even in college, I remember I take 4 courses, and I have these notebooks, and I always wanted to bring the correct notebook to class. So the first day I'd go, oh, red is biology and green is English. And it was just sort of, I'd look at it that way, and that made sense to me. And I think that's kind of how the colors happen, is it's like, what are the colors of this emotional space, and what are the colors of the light of this place? And how do they I don't even know.
Well, you use a big range of color, I think, and you use all the colors.
Well, for sure. I teach color. I love color, and yeah, absolutely. But actually, none of my paintings have a gazillion colors in them.
Yeah, they're chromatic.
Yeah, most of them are, although some of them are more color. And my watercolors have more colors typically, and some of my oils do also. So it's really what is the color that seems to express that emotional drama that I feel is in the thing that I've read.
Makes sense.
I have a question for Robin. Can you talk a little bit about your lenticular print?
Oh, sure. So when I started this project, it was always going to end up as a lenticular print. I wanted the green lush landscape to become the forest fire. This location is kind of a really special place for me. I grew up as a small child in southern New Hampshire, and my grandparents lived in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. So when we would visit them, we would have to drive through this area of Franconia Notch. And that's, I don't know if you know the old man of the mountain in New Hampshire, but that's where it was. And it was always this exciting moment when you'd turn the corner and you'd see the face. You know, my brother and I would always, even when I go through there now, even though the face isn't there anymore, I still feel that excitement. And so there's a trail across from Echo Lake in that area, and there's like a little trail off the trail, and it's called Artist's Bluff, and which is the title of this series. And I went there, I took my daughter there, and my husband and our dog, and you know, I was looking out and the mist was going through the mountains, and I made this little video of it because it was just like a really nice, peaceful moment in this place that it just means so much to me. And I started thinking about how I think there must have been forest fires happening somewhere in the news at the time, like California or somewhere, which seems to be happening a lot lately. And I started thinking about how sad it would be to lose this area, because it's part of, it's not a national park, but it's like a national forest, I think. And how amazing it is that there was this time, there was this turning point in the United States when we could have just developed everything. And we could have just built houses in these beautiful places and made real estate developments, and everyone could have made a lot of money and all that, but we saved them and we preserved them. And so, you know, I've always loved lenticular prints, you know, when you like open a Cracker Jack box and you get like, I don't know, face or something that changes. And I just thought it would be a great way to sort of animate something that's still, that doesn't move usually. And so I've done a couple of these now for various subjects, and I hope to do more, but yeah, and it's also fun just to watch people like sort of stand in a gallery and shift. You know, I don't know, it creates like, I always like to make work that's engaging. I've done a lot of work where people could touch stuff or move stuff, or so I like to make work that is somewhat unconventional in that way, because when you think about a gallery, you know, like you don't touch anything, and you know, which, you know, is understandable, but I do sort of like those moments when you can engage the viewer in a different way.
Is there a place you send the images to have the lenticular made, or do you actually create that lenticular?
You know, I found someone online who specifically worked with artists and did larger pieces. So I originally, what I was going to do is cut these up and do like a
Right.
yeah, but I was too, it took me so long to paint them that I was like, I just couldn't do it. So this was the next best way of knowing that I wouldn't wreck them. So.
I have a question, and then after you guys talk for whatever, maybe you guys all have questions. But this show, where you all come from, is this feeling of we have to do something about this world that's really, you know, the environment needs us, help kind of feeling. And I feel like, at least for me, when I make art, it's sort of my most hopeful time. It's like planting a garden, kind of. Tell us if you have like this idea. I think, Alice, in your writing, you wrote that you read stories from like the Old Testament interests you, and we all know stories like Noah's Ark. Are these like your ark, and if not, is there an ark that you can imagine for all of us, like hope?
So hope in terms of what happens to the environment?
Well, hope in terms of you as artists working today. Is that what you're doing? I don't know if my
I
question
think,
is.
yeah, I mean, I think my work is actually, I think hope is a really good word for it. I actually tried recently I saw this image of a horrible image of something in Gaza, and it's hard to be horrified by what's going on there, and I thought, well, I want to make a drawing, it was a drawing that's gonna express this horror of all this death and destruction, and I worked on it, and when it was done, I looked and I went, this is a drawing of hope. I mean, there's nothing in this that looks evil or harsh or destructive, and I really think that's all my work. I think that all my work has a kind of nostalgia for something lost, this kind of fear and sense of we losing the planet's life, but we're losing a lot of things that we value, but then this deep, I think I get it from my mother, this deep hope that somehow, I don't know how, there's gonna be some kind of miracle, and we're gonna save it, and I think that's what really was always at root for the tremendous amount of work I did to fight fracking, and we, at least temporarily, hopefully forever, have banned it from New York and the Delaware River Valley, and so